I am a clinical psychologist. That's why I'm doing this talk tonight. So that means that I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. And I work mostly with children and families. I do some therapy and I do some psychological testing for diagnosis. So I obviously have a heart for mental health and for thoughts and emotions, and I love to talk about them. But I'm also a Christian and grew up in the church. And I've just noticed, especially as I got into psychology more, that there is just a whole lot of stigma. And I feel like sometimes, especially in the church, about mental health, that we don't want to talk about it or acknowledge that we have any kind of need mental health-wise. And it's just, it's disappointing to me and upsetting because I feel like we could be so much healthier and just thriving in our faith so much better if we would actually pay attention to this and do something about it. So I just offered to Tracy a while back that if there was ever an opportunity and there was an interest in talking about it, that I would be willing to do that. So that's what I'm here to do. So tonight, I'm mostly just going to talk about mental health in general, like what it is and why I think that God made us to have emotions and thoughts, and how we can be more aware and just some strategies for taking care of our mental health overall. And then if you want to come back next Wednesday, I'm going to deep dive into thoughts a little bit more and talk about how they affect our emotions and what you can do if your thoughts aren't serving you well and how you can change them and things like that. Okay, so I'm just going to get started. So mental health, sometimes people have no idea what it even really means to be mentally healthy other than just they know that that includes emotions. So emotions definitely are part of our mental health. But it also includes our thoughts. It includes our behaviors and the relationships that we have with other people. So a lot of times I think we get nervous about mental health, or we don't want to acknowledge it because we can't see emotions and we can't see thoughts. And sometimes we think that they're less valid or less legitimate because we can't see them, or we think that we can ignore them and that they will go away. But definitely not an accurate thought. And again, like I mentioned, there's just so much stigma about these. So compared to physical health, like we all know that our physical health is really important. We could list off all kinds of things that we need to be doing to be physically healthy. But with mental health, sometimes we have no idea what it even is. We don't really know how we can be mentally healthy, and we just want to pretend like it's not there. But then we get surprised when something goes wrong with it, when we've done absolutely nothing to maintain it. So we know that, again, with physical health, if you know about eating healthy and you know about exercising, if you stop doing those things, you stop having the physical health that you once had. But with mental health, the same thing exists, but nobody's ever done anything, period. So again, it's another reason why I want to talk about it more. And also, we live in a world that is hurting and broken, like we talk about it at church all the time. So sometimes things go wrong with your mental health, and it's okay to talk about that, and it's okay to acknowledge it. It's really important to do that. And with physical health, we do a good job of supporting each other and saying, I have this illness, and we seek help, and we pray for each other. And when it's mental health related, we just want to pretend like we don't have that going on at all. Or we judge ourselves for the fact that we have anything that is negative. So if we're depressed or if we're anxious, we tend to think that that's a reflection on us as being a bad Christian. Like if I would be more faithful, then I wouldn't be struggling with this. But we would never do that with our physical health. So just wanted to highlight that difference. And I guess as a side note, as I'm talking, in psychology, we really like reflection, and we like to pause to think about things and to allow for silence. And so I'm going to throw out a lot of things tonight that I just want us to think about and reflect on. And I might just do intentional pausing. And that's why you have note pages. So I want you to maybe just write down questions for yourself that you can be thinking about, or things that you have never thought about in that way, and then go back and reflect on that later. So in psychology, we say that insight is a huge part of change. So in all of this discussion, if it's something that you have not thought about before, then you can't do anything about it until you think about like how that applies to me. if that's something that I struggle with or not, and you have to go back over it. So again, like what Tracy was saying, if we just sit and listen to this and you say, well, that was really interesting, and you leave, you will get absolutely nothing out of it. So mental health wise especially, it's the process of sitting and reflecting about this and thinking, what do I identify with and where am I struggling and what do I need to work on? It's those kinds of things that are going to be helpful to you. Okay. So one of the things I think is really important for us to remember in the church is that God created us exactly the way we are on purpose. He did not make any mistakes when he created us. So the fact that we have emotions and that we have thoughts means that we were given those intentionally. And God wants us to be healthy in all aspects. So we talk about our body being a temple, but our body doesn't stop at the brain. So we need to also include our thoughts and our emotions and our relationships in that. So this is a slide where I've gone through and just like thought about just a few of the times that I could recall Jesus showing strong emotion. And there are a lot of these in the Bible. So I want to read through them and talk a little bit about what the emotion is that he's showing and how he is showing it. And then just ask you some questions to think about and sort of pause here. So again, like think to yourself and write down any notes that you have. And also as a side note, interrupt me throughout with questions if you have them, and then I'll take them at the end too. So while we're looking at these also as a side note, if you feel like you feel convicted by some of the questions that I'm asking about these, or you don't feel like you're handling some of these emotions very well, then make note of it and note that that's something that you want to work on. But if you sit and judge yourself for having a hard time with this, then that's going to defeat the purpose. So don't say like, gosh, I'm not very good at this, or like, I can't do this, because you're not going to get any better that way. Okay, so the first passage is from John 11:35, and it just says Jesus wept. So this is referring to when Jesus was at Lazarus's tomb. And just in the couple of verses prior to this, I'm assuming you're all familiar with the story. So they come to Jesus a few days beforehand, and they tell him that Lazarus is very sick and dying, and they need him to come and to help him. And he intentionally delays for a couple of days coming. But on the way, he's talking about how he's going to raise him, and that like essentially like that this is fine, and we're going to use this for the glory of God. And he gets there, and everybody's very upset, and they say, "You're too late. He already died." And he's even saying like, "This is fine. I'm going to raise him." And he gets there, and he stands there and weeps. And I think it's so interesting, and I haven't really thought about it much before until I was getting ready for this. But it seems ironic in a lot of ways that he intentionally delayed, that he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and he wept. Like it is not just like that he was sort of tearful and he felt bad for them, but was like, well, I'm God and I understand that like this is not the end, and death has no hold, and so I'm just not going to feel this. Like, even though he knows all of that, and minutes later, he knows that he's going to raise him from the dead, he is just so completely overcome that he's standing there weeping. And so I think we need to think about this for a little bit and think about how we handle sadness. Do we allow ourselves to weep very often about anything, about the things that matter to us? Like, this obviously mattered a lot to him, and he knew the bigger perspective, and he still thought that it was valid, being fully God and fully man, to be so completely overcome with sadness that he would just weep about it, even though he knew the bigger picture. And another note, I think it's really interesting that he was a man who is in a position of relational power with the people who are around him. Our society also tends to tell men and young boys that crying is not okay, that like strong shows of emotion, like that are vulnerable, are not okay. And he obviously does not seem embarrassed by this at all. He doesn't seem embarrassed that he is sad, that he is weeping about it. He's not trying to go and hide, which is another thing that we do a lot when we're sad, that we're like, well, I should get myself together. Like, I need to stop crying, and I need to wipe this away, and I need to be strong, like for myself or for my image or for the people that are around me. And he's doing absolutely none of that. He's just standing in the midst of them weeping when he could be raising him from the dead. Like, he thinks that it's important to weep. So I just think that's really interesting. And so maybe just think about that for a second again. And yeah, I think it's a really good question. I have no idea. And also, I'm not a biblical scholar, like just coming at this from a Christian and a psychologist perspective, but I wonder that. I wonder if it's both. If he felt so sad that everybody was so upset and that we have death in this world when that's not what he intended. I don't know. Yeah. But also he was fully man, and I wonder if, like us, the death of a friend, if he felt that too. But I think like there's something really poignant to it because he knew that he was getting ready to raise him back. And that death doesn't have the final word anyway. And he still wept. So another really strong emotion that Jesus shows is anger, which I think we also have a tricky time with in the church. Sometimes we think that anger is just a bad thing, or really that any negative emotion is a bad thing. Jesus, this is, I think, the really famous example of when he gets so angry in the temple that people are selling and being, I can't think of the more refined word, being like crooked in the church and doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. So Matthew 21:12 says that Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. So he is obviously very angry. He has a good reason to be angry, and he's not trying to hide his anger or to like keep calm and collected. And he obviously doesn't think that it's bad that he's angry. Like, he realizes like this is a just reason to be angry, and I am just going to let it out. But I think for me, this was really interesting because if I had a kid come in for therapy that we were like working on anger, and the parent said, well, this week he got really angry and like, yeah, it was bad, but he like threw over all the furniture, then I would say that's not a very healthy way for you to show your anger. So I think it's really interesting that Jesus did that. And then I just think to myself, like, what does that mean for me? That like, we all have judgment that anything destructive, is a bad thing. So I don't know. He thought it was fine. And even though he had a good reason to be angry, he was physically destructive. I would say that is a very aggressive, way to show your anger, but he shows it that way, and he's not apologetic about it at all. So again, like, how do you handle anger? Do you allow yourself to even acknowledge that you feel angry? Or do you think that anger in only certain situations is okay? And are you trying to hide that? Are you passive aggressive with it when you're angry? And trying to just like sneak in little comments, but never actually express to others what is upsetting to you, whether you're in the right or not, because he's very obvious with it. So. Then the last example is the one that I really like the most, or that I think like hits home the most for me, because I think it's about worry. And again, I'm not a biblical scholar, and so take from it what you will. But this is when Jesus is in the garden and he's getting ready to be arrested and crucified. So I took from Matthew 26, verses 36 and 38. So it says, then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, I think is what it's called. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. So he knew the plan, right? He was fully God and fully man. He knew that he was getting ready to be arrested, that he was going to be crucified, and he knew that this was what he needed to do. And I think that he was completely full of faith and completely on board to do God's will. But he describes, it's so strong, like to say my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Like, even though he knew how important this was for all of humanity, I think that he just seems so scared to me. And I think that like when he describes like overwhelmed with sorrow, I think that sounds like sad, but I think it sounds really scared to me, that he needed them to be awake and that he needed them to pray for him. And when he's praying and other verses surrounding this, he's asking God to take it from him. That like, if it would be within his will, like, I don't want this to happen to me. And we have such a hard time with worry in the church. And I think we think that it's a sin a lot of the time, whenever we feel afraid of something. But Jesus was really, really worried about this. And he had every reason in the world to be worried about it. It sounds terrifying to me. But if we have a situation that comes up that we feel like we know is God's will and we feel scared about it, then I think we judge ourselves a lot and think that that is us sinning, or that is us being unfaithful, or not trusting that God is going to come through for us. But Jesus was really afraid of this. And he doesn't try to hide that from God, and he doesn't seem to try to hide that from his disciples who are with him. He's really open about how terrifying this is and how much he wants prayer, and just says really openly to God, like, I don't really want to do this. And again, he's not apologetic about it or thinking that that is a bad thing that he feels that way. And I know we just don't do this well in the church. We judge worry so much. And I think it's because there are verses in the Bible that tell us not to worry, but I view those as more of like encouragement verses, that like God is going to help you through this. And we use it almost like to condemn ourselves, that I am bad or I am less than because I am afraid or because I am worried. And really, that just makes us feel even worse about ourselves. It's not going to help you be less worried, that you feel like now you're a bad Christian because you're worrying. So yeah, I just think we need to reimagine emotion, and to reconsider our idea that any negative emotion is a bad thing, or something that God would not feel or would not condone, because Jesus felt all of these, and he felt them really strongly, and he doesn't hide them. He talks about them and he shows them, and he seems to think that they're valid. And God would not have created us with these if they weren't meant for us to have, if they weren't important for our experience on earth. And he obviously understands all of them. So there are a whole lot of reasons why you might see excessive anger or excessive any emotion. So like, without knowing the history, like, I couldn't give you a real good idea, but some kids or some people in general have seen an emotion used in an unhealthy way. And so they use that emotion the same way that they've seen it. But also, kids learn how to regulate emotions by watching the adults around them. So yes, they could see that emotion used in an unhealthy way, but they could also just see like an absence of adults modeling how to handle emotion in general. So maybe it's not that they were always angry, but it's that they didn't show their anger, or like express like how to do that in a healthy way. And anger sometimes is secondary to another emotion. So if a kid didn't feel safe in an environment where they were in, instead of feeling sad, it feels safer to feel angry, because it's more of like an aggressive stance. So sometimes they express anger instead of sadness. And then there are like 6,000 other things that could be going on. Like, kids with ADHD have a harder time regulating, so they tend to go from 0 to 60 really fast and get mad about stuff that doesn't matter. Just because they aren't very attentive to subtle changes in emotion, and they're impulsive and they don't think about consequences. So there could be a whole lot of things, and trauma makes you angry, and anxiety makes you angry. So a lot of things cause anger. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's pretty complicated. Psychology is really complicated. And I think so is physical health, but it's another reason why people are like afraid of it, because we can't see it, and we can't make like really clear sense of it on our own sometimes. So it just feels like it's like too hard and it's confusing and it's uncomfortable and like, let's not talk about it. So it happens a lot. So I guess, I don't think I said this at the beginning. I meant to give a little bit of a disclaimer. That just reminded me. Psychologists and mental health counselors are fantastic resources. And I do therapy, but we have a really strict ethics code, that says that I should not be seeing people that I know. So I can't see you in therapy and I can't see your children in therapy, but I can give you resources of people if you're interested, and I'll talk about that at the end. But it's a really good thing to seek help, and we'll talk about, what to do when you want some outside help. But yes. Okay, any other thoughts about any of these emotions? Like, did anybody ever, like, notice this before? I feel like, even as a psychologist, like, I've never paid attention to how emotional Jesus is. Like, I don't know if anybody's thought of this or was surprised to see this at all. But, yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a term called displacement. And so, like, you get mad at work at something that happened, but you feel like you can't, like, go off on that person. And so you come home and you, like, kick the dog. Or you come home and you yell at your spouse, or like you're short with your kids. And he doesn't do that because like in the moment, he's like, I'm really mad and I'm just going to show you how mad I am. And displacement doesn't happen when you get it out. So it's a lesson for all emotions. But I think maybe I was going to talk about this later. But, so it is not a problem to have negative emotions. And I think that's something that we really, really need to understand better. It is not a problem to feel sad. It's not a problem to be angry, or to be worried about something. You know that it's a problem when you're stuck in it and you can't shake it, no matter what you're trying to do. So the fact that you experience any of these, like no matter how strong they are, really, it's just part of being a human, and it's not a bad part of being a human to feel these things. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that it's something that we have to hurry and get away from. And that's one of the big problems I think that we all have within our mental health, is that we are uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And we're afraid of fear, and we're afraid of sadness. And if we feel something that we don't like, then we're like, oh, we have to like stop it. Like, don't talk about it. Pretend like it's not there. And that just tends to make it worse, and it makes it stuck. And the more you try to not think about something, the more that it persists. And we get into really negative cycles, because we're just fighting so hard something that is just normal, that we just have to allow ourselves to feel and just keep moving through. And if we would stop resisting, then it would just go away. And it feels ironic in that way, that like the things you resist are the things that persist. But that's how it works. So. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. So just a little bit more about mental health in general. So just a reminder, God gave us emotions on purpose. They serve a purpose. So let's see. So how well we take care of our emotions and our mental health, that determines just our overall level of health. So you can't ignore these things and make them go away. They will rear themselves like in whatever area of life they can. They seep out if you don't deal with them and you don't talk about them or acknowledge that they are there. But also like we want them to be there. So like happiness is a fantastic emotion, and we all like to feel that way. And it's nice for us to feel at least content most of the time, but the negative emotions are important, and we want to be able to feel them. And if any of you have ever gotten to a point in your life where you just felt numb, I think like you understand that that's like the worst feeling in the world, is when you can't feel anything because you're just so overwhelmed. So like sadness in particular, like if we never felt sad about things, then like nothing would feel important in our life. Like sadness allows us to say like this mattered and this was important and it's not okay. And if we didn't feel sad, again, like everything would just be empty. Fear is a really important emotion because it keeps us safe. It's our body's alarm. And if we didn't feel fear, we would walk into traffic and die, and we would be killed by all kinds of things. It's really adaptive. And like when children don't feel fear, it's very, very dangerous. And we get really afraid for them, because bad things are going to happen when you're not afraid. So we need that emotion. And anger tells us that something is unjust, and that something needs to change. And it can inspire us to action in a lot of ways. So none of these things are bad in and of themselves. And we need to teach ourselves that it's okay to have a negative emotion. And we need to teach our children that all of these feelings are okay to have. I have emotion faces in my office, since I work with kids a lot. And we'll go through our flashcards of like saying what the emotion is. And then at the end we say, how many of these feelings are okay to have? And we say, all of them. And it's fun. So it's really important.
What part is it in the mental state, the spirit become unhealthy?
When you're stuck in it, yeah. When you can't feel other things and when you can't do the things that you need to do in your life because you're afraid. So like anxiety in particular, one of the most important things when we're treating it is that we try to teach people that like you can be afraid and that doesn't mean that you're in danger. Like fear and danger are not the same things. Like you have false alarms. So if you're afraid and it keeps you in a box, then your comfort zone is going to keep shrinking. The more you avoid, the more afraid you are, and it just spreads everywhere. But if you say to yourself, I can be really afraid and I can try this anyway, and I can go anyway, that's healthy. And that's about as good as you can get because you're going to be afraid at various points in your life. But when it's ruminating and when you can't get out of it and when you stop doing things, that's when it's unhealthy. And then, so just another little side note, we like to separate in society mental health and physical health, but like I mentioned, the brain is part of your body, and that's where your mental health exists. They're not two separate things. They affect each other really, really closely. And when you ignore your mental health, you have a whole lot of physical side effects. So just to kind of highlight really quickly before we move on, like depression causes changes in weight and appetite. It causes difficulty with sleeping. It can cause physically like slowing down, like you actually don't move as quickly. It causes loss of energy. Anxiety can cause temporary spikes in blood pressure, and it causes headaches and stomach aches and GI issues and irritable bowel syndrome, and it causes muscle tension. So like there are so many things that are overlapping. In a really extreme example, I think this is just really interesting. This is probably not going to happen to anybody or anybody that you know, but there's something called glove anesthesia. Where like if you've experienced like a really big trauma and you haven't dealt with it or acknowledged it, in really extreme examples, some people will feel like their hand and like maybe like to hear, it goes numb and they can't move it, like they're paralyzed. And it's really there, like they really can't move it and they can't feel it. But it's physically impossible for your hand to be paralyzed and for your arm not to be, because they're connected. So people will actually experience that though, where they just can't move their hand at all and they can't feel it. And it's because they've had trauma that they're not expressing. And so when you deal with it, then they move their hand again. I think it's so fascinating and so extreme. But it just goes to show like they're very, very much connected. And the more that you try to ignore them, the more physical symptoms you have. So that's why we notice sometimes kids having a lot of physical symptoms. So like nervous kids in particular are kids who have stomach aches all the time, or they have headaches like before they go to school or on the day of a test. And so it's because they don't know how to express that. They don't know how to talk about it. And so it comes out in another way. Okay, so this is just a moment to pause for reflection because it's important and we should do it. So just think for a minute, maybe take some notes for yourself, but what are you doing currently that is active that you do to maintain your mental health? And it could be anything, and you're not sharing this out loud, obviously, but just something that you're doing. And if you can't think of anything, don't sit and judge yourself because you're not doing anything to maintain your mental health because, right, that's not going to help you. So just kind of think to yourself for a minute and then we'll pick up and keep moving. And I'll give you ideas if you don't have any. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. And for the rest of the time, we're just going to talk a little bit about some things that you can do to maintain mental health, and then we'll wrap up. So this picture is something that I want to highlight. I'm realizing after I put it on the slide that it kind of like does a weird eye trick thing, so I'm really sorry. So this is called the cognitive triad. So it's a triangle, and if you can't see it or read it, on each of the points there's a different word. So it's your thoughts and your behaviors and your emotions. They are all connected. So this is a really, really important thing if you want to take care of your mental health and change your emotions. So you need to realize that the things that you say to yourself are directly connected to your emotions, and they're directly connected to the things that you do then in your life. So I'll use examples. So I can only think of kid examples because that's what I do all day. So with kids, I'll say like, so if the phone rings and like you can't see who it is and you think it's your school calling to tell your parent that you like did something really terrible and like you got written up, then how would you feel? And they would say like scared or maybe a little bit sad, or maybe they're sort of angry. And I would say, and what would you do? And they're like, hide the phone, or like something so that you can't get to it. Say, okay, so then like, what if the phone rang and you thought it was somebody like inviting you over to play, like it was your grandparent or it was your friend? Then they say, how would you feel? And you say excited. And what would you do? And you would like hurry and answer the phone. So it's just a really simple example that like the same situation exactly, it can really change how you feel just based on your interpretation of what's happening. Like the event is exactly the same, but it's what you say to yourself about the event that affects how you feel, and then it affects directly what you do in your life. So if you have emotions that are bothering you, that you need to get unstuck from, then you can change any part of this triangle and it changes every other part. So if you are sad, then you can either look at the thoughts that you have, like the things that you're saying to yourself, and work on if you need to change those, or you can change the things that you're doing, and then that changes your emotion. But we change emotions usually indirectly through one of those two things. So the slides that I have, there are different strategies, behaviors, thoughts, and emotions for things that we can do. So behavior-wise, making behavior changes is usually one of the first things that we do, like especially if somebody is feeling depressed. It's one of the easiest things that you can just like, you can do something different and it can give you enough of a jump that you can kind of get out of a funk if you're in it. So there are all kinds of things that you can do. These are some suggestions. So relaxation is a good one. So it could just be either just something that you find relaxing, and that can be a great thing, but also like actual physical relaxation exercises are probably like the best way that you can relax. So you can work on deep breathing, and there are real specific ways that you should do that so that it's more effective. But like you can look up videos on YouTube, or if you're seeing a therapist, like they will have real specific suggestions for how you can do that well. There's also something called progressive muscle relaxation, where you go through every part of your body basically, and you make it really tense and you hold it for like 5 seconds and then you intentionally relax it, and do each body part a couple times and just kind of go through. And it helps you to recognize when you're feeling tense and when you're holding tension in your body versus like when you're relaxed. And then you can relax on purpose a little bit better. You can also do guided imagery, which is like my favorite thing in the world, and you should write it down. You can look up YouTube videos about it. But basically, you just imagine yourself in a place that is peaceful for you. So like I love to watch videos on YouTube that are like, you're at the ocean and like, you kind of like have a little like walk on the beach and it's just relaxing and they play like islandy music and it's just really nice. It's just like 5 minutes where you're just relaxed. Or they have like forest ones or like whatever you like. So those are really fun. So relaxation is important, especially if you're anxious. Relaxation is really good. Sleep is really important, just for overall brain function. But it's really good for helping you get out of a funk too. So make sure that you're getting enough sleep, and practicing good sleep hygiene. Exercise is really good too. It's good for physical health, but it's good for mental health, and it releases dopamine in your brain, which is like the pleasure center. So when you're exercising, you're actively releasing endorphins, and it is really good for your mood, to like do that on a regular basis. And it can just be a walk through your neighborhood. It doesn't have to be like a run or something impressive. I don't know. And also things that you think are fun, or that you used to think are fun. So, especially like if you're starting to get depressed and you just feel like you're in a funk that you can't get out of, one of the most common things for people to experience is that they feel like nothing is really fun anymore. Like even the stuff that you used to think was fun is just like, blah. So then you stop doing those things because they don't sound very fun. And then you have even less enjoyment in your life. And then you get more depressed and then your energy gets lower and like you just keep spiraling downward. So the most important thing is just to like schedule yourself things to do each day, like one enjoyable thing every day. If it's like 5 minutes or 10 minutes long, even if it's not fun right now, if it used to be fun, then you should try to do it. And the more you do it, the more fun it will become. And it can also be helpful, like, for you to say to yourself, like, how fun do I predict that this is going to be today? Like on a scale of 0 to 10. And if you're depressed, you're going to be like, it's a 1. And then you'll go do it and maybe it's a 2 or a 3. And then you can kind of like say back to yourself, okay, that was a little bit better than I thought it was going to be. And you have some documentation that actually like, this is a little bit fun. And you go back and then it just kind of pulls you up a little bit. But just keep doing things. Like you need to be active to keep your mood up. And then things that you think are meaningful. If it's like helping somebody else, that's a really good thing for your mood. And spending time with people that you love, is really good. So you can do something active with them. Like you could take a walk with your friend and it's a double whammy. Or just do anything with somebody that you like. And then also just as a side note, behaviorally, there are all kinds of things that are really good for you. And there are all kinds of things that are just neutral in your life that like whatever, like do what you want. But if you find that you are really rigid in any of your behaviors, that's usually a sign that something is not quite as healthy as it should be. So, like routines are really great for a lot of things and for keeping your memory up so that you don't have to like think about so many things at once. But if you find that your routine is so rigid that if something changes it just a little bit, your whole day is off, then that's a sign that you need to do something different, that's a little bit too rigid. Or if you always like do something with this particular person, but they have something come up and you're really angry about it, then that's a sign that like you need to work on that or like look at that a little bit more. Flexibility is a sign of health physically and mentally. Emotion-wise, like I was mentioning earlier, we don't usually try to change emotions like really directly because it doesn't work very well. So you can do those different things behaviorally, or you can change your thoughts. But one of the most important things is changing our attitude towards our emotions. Again, like recognizing that it's not a bad thing that you feel something that's negative. It doesn't mean something bad about you. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be there. We need to just acknowledge that emotion is present, because if you try to push it down and say like, I'm not sad, I don't feel like that, I'm not worried, then it just makes it worse and it's just going to come out some other way. So just sometimes like, I think like Tracy mentions this sometimes, like you can just be like driving or like doing something random and then all of a sudden you're just like, man, like you just feel really bad, and you can't necessarily pinpoint why. And usually there's a thought associated with it and we'll talk about that. But one of the most important things you can just start with is just acknowledge that emotion is there. Like say, okay, like that is a feeling and that feeling is sad. And you don't have to judge it that like, I shouldn't be feeling sad. Like I have nothing to feel sad about. And why am I feeling like this? Or like, why do I feel so anxious? Because like I have so much going for me. Like don't judge yourself for having the emotion. Just like notice that it is there and acknowledge that it will come and go. So emotions they're just like that. Like, they come, they stay for a little bit, and then they go away if you're not like holding on to them and like really upset by their presence. So you can close your eyes and just kind of like mentally picture it floating away. You could picture that it's a cloud in the sky and you can just let it float, or something in like a river and you can just let it float by. And it will come and go, and that's okay. So a saying that I really like too is that like we should let our emotions come along for the ride with us, but we shouldn't let them drive. So I think that's fun too. Okay. Thought-wise, like I said earlier, like we're going to deep dive into thoughts next week because there are so many good things that you can do for them. But one of the most important things to know is like from that triangle. So usually your interpretation of a situation or the thoughts that you have, what you're saying to yourself, it directly affects your mood. So if you notice all of a sudden that your mood has shifted to something negative, it's probably because you said something to yourself that is making you feel that way. So we have to just stop first, acknowledge the emotion, and then say, like, what just happened? And like, what did I just say to myself that made me feel like that? And that can be hard when you're first starting to try it, but the more you practice that, the easier it gets. So we call those automatic thoughts because you can't stop them from coming, and you can't do anything like to affect those. Like, so that's always going to be there. You're going to have an initial response to something, and you don't get to choose that, but you get to choose your secondary thoughts, like what you do with those. So notice what that automatic thought was that made your emotion shift. And then we need to recognize that you don't have to believe everything that you think. So just because you think that so-and-so is mad at you, or that this was not fair, or that you're never going to get whatever, doesn't mean that that is accurate. So it's making you maybe depressed, or it's making you anxious or angry, and it's not even true, and you're wasting your energy on it. So that's why we're going to deep dive so much into it, because there are a lot of questions that you can ask yourself to say, like, is this thought actually realistic, or is it just making me depressed or anxious for no reason? But just recognize, I think, just first off, I had a thought. What was that thought? And I don't have to believe this. Like, I can choose what to do with this. And everybody has trends in the things that they say to themselves, for the better and for the worse. So like, if you're depressed, your thoughts are probably all like, this is terrible. Everything is terrible. It's always been terrible, and it's always going to be terrible. And like, it actually, depression like changes your thoughts to be like that, to be more global and like stable and just negative. But also your personality kind of shapes the things that you say towards yourself. So if your self-confidence isn't super high, then you can find yourself like blaming yourself for lots of things that go wrong. That like when somebody isn't able to show up for something, it's probably because I said something wrong, or it's because I did something that offended them, or it's because they don't like me, and this person is going to leave because I'm not good enough. So this is where like a therapist can come in really handy too, with helping you identify themes in the things that you're saying. But notice if you do find that there's a trend in those things that are making you feel sad or anxious or angry, then that means something. And we'll work on this, but the thoughts that are not helpful, or the thoughts that aren't true, we can replace. Like, you don't have to just stick with those thoughts. You don't have to believe the thoughts that you're saying. We can do something about that. So a really simple strategy that you could do right away is to start thinking about positive things that are going on. So like gratitude journals can be really, really helpful if you feel like you just need to be more positive in general in your life. So like I have one, and every day I just list like 3 things that I'm grateful for. Every evening I just like write them out. And then it's fun to look back and like see the various things, and it shifts your thinking, and it makes you start like noticing the good that is going on. But you can also, like, if you just feel like you're in like a funk for a minute, like you just kind of notice that you're sad and you don't know what you said to yourself, just think, what good things have happened today? And you just like list them off in your head, or you say like, what do I have that's going to be good, like that I'm looking forward to, and just list them. And that can like shift things back to you. And I just like this verse. I feel like we use this a lot. But it's Philippians 4:8. And it says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And that is psychology. So I think that's another thing I always like. I hate it when people think that psychology is bad or evil. Like, God made psychology. He made mental health. And I'm not trying to do any like witchcraft or voodoo or anything creepy, but, okay. So does anybody have any questions about those before I kind of talk about like general help stuff? Okay. So, how to know if you want some more help with this. So number one, if you think that you would like some help, then get it. I think that's really simple. Like if you already know that you're like, I would like to talk about this with somebody. I have this emotion that I'm struggling with, or this relationship that is just not going well. Our area within psychology is all about thoughts and emotions and behaviors and relationships. And so if it falls in that area, a psychologist or a therapist could definitely work with you on that. So if you want it, just get it. You deserve to be healthy and you deserve to work on that. And it doesn't mean that you're crazy or that you like really need help. It just means that you would like to take care of yourself, and that's a good decision. If you have some really strong negative emotions that you're having trouble shaking, that you just feel like you're stuck in, that's another sign that it could be helpful to talk to somebody who has some more knowledge about this. They can help you get unstuck. And if you're having trouble doing just your daily activities that you want to, like what I was saying earlier, if you're anxious and it's keeping you from doing the things that you want to do, then that's a sign that you should talk to somebody about it. And if it's affecting your relationships, or if it's affecting your job, then you should talk to somebody then. And also, as another random side note, so you can definitely see a Christian therapist, and there are some of those around. It's called Community Downtown. It's in Columbus. I think it's through the Community Church of Columbus. Is that right? And they usually see people who don't have insurance, and sometimes they see people for free. Or if you have insurance or you have a lot of means to pay, they might send you to somewhere else where you can get services because they really want to serve the people who can't otherwise get therapy. But they're a good resource for you. And then, so also, like, I don't market myself as a Christian psychologist. And so I think that, like, things like that are important to know, that just because you go to a therapist or a psychologist and they don't say that they're a Christian, it doesn't mean that they are not, or that they can't understand where you're coming from. And even if you have a therapist who is not a Christian, it doesn't mean that they can't help you with this. So we're taught really, really heavily that it's not about us, and it's not about what I believe or what my opinion is about your life or your situation, that it's about where you are, and that it's my job to understand what your faith is and what is important to you. So like, we're taught really specifically, like, just because two people say that they are Christians does not mean that we believe all the same things. So just because you come in and you say, well, I'm a Christian, like, do you understand what that means? Do you know where I'm coming from? I don't necessarily know where you're coming from. And so even if I have somebody come in and they say my faith is important to me, then I'll ask them to tell me about what their faith is and what exactly they believe. And if they say, I'm really struggling with this and I just feel like that's not okay, I would ask them, like, why? And what do you believe that makes you think that? And so sometimes it could look like maybe the person you're working with, like, you think maybe they're not a Christian or they don't get this. And it's just because we are really aware that words are vague, and that just because we use the same label doesn't mean we believe the same thing. And I'm not going to put what I think about it onto you. So most of the time, like, I'm very intentional about not telling people that that's my faith, because I also want them to be able to say exactly what theirs is, or if they're really struggling with something that they think is a bad Christian thing to struggle with, then they don't bring that up if they think that I have judgments about that already. So yeah, I guess just know that just because somebody doesn't tell you that they're a Christian doesn't mean that they're not, or that they don't understand where you're coming from or don't agree where you're coming from. But there are specific reasons why I might or might not share that with somebody. So then this last page is just like, if you're interested in getting some therapy services, these are some places that I know of that are in the surrounding communities. This does not mean that this is everywhere that is available. And I'm not endorsing any of these specifically. I just know that they're around. So therapy is your best bet if you want to work on thoughts or emotions that are really bothering you, or a relationship that is really struggling. And psychological testing is if you have no idea where to start and you have no idea what the problem is, and you need a diagnosis, like, to figure out what to do with that. So if you have, like, a kid who you don't know if they have ADHD or if they might have autism, and you need, like, a diagnosis to get a service, that's what you need testing for. But otherwise, you can just go to counseling and that will work. So yeah, just know that these are available. And like I said, next time we'll talk a lot more about thoughts and things that you can do. So I guess one last thing before we wrap up, maybe just look back at the strategies that you wrote down earlier about, what you're doing to maintain your mental health, and notice, like, do you have any strategies? Do you have any more ideas that you would like to add after looking at this? And look at the strategies that you wrote down And are they all behavior strategies? Are they all just like things that you're doing? And if they are, it's fantastic to start there. But can you add a thought strategy about like recognizing the things that you're saying or thinking about more positive things? Or can you add an emotion strategy of like picturing them floating by and not judging yourself for having them? Like what can you do differently this week that is intentional, that's going to help you maintain a little bit better? So that's all that I have for tonight. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Or all right. Thank you, everybody. I'll be here next week.